I was sitting on my front porch in Sedona, Arizona, drinking my morning coffee when I saw her marching up my driveway with a clipboard clutched to her chest, like it was some kind of holy scripture. The woman had that particular walk that middle-aged suburban warriors develop, the kind that says she's about to ruin someone's day and feels absolutely justified doing it. Her name was Brenda, and she'd been the president of our homeowner association for exactly 3 months, which apparently was just long enough for the power to completely consume whatever reasonable person might have existed before. "Good morning, Mr. O'Brien," she called out, her voice dripping with false pleasantness that made my teeth hurt. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I set my coffee mug down on the wooden armrest and leaned back in my rocking chair. "Actually, Brenda, you kind of are. I'm in the middle of enjoying my retirement, which I've earned after 40 years of construction work." She didn't even pretend to care about my response. Instead, she thrust a piece of paper toward me, her acrylic nails clicking against the clipboard. "I'm here on official HOA business. We've been doing an audit of all street infrastructure in the development, and I need to discuss some outstanding fees with you." "Outstanding fees?" I took the paper from her hand and started reading. The heading said Infrastructure Maintenance Assessment in bold letters, and beneath it was a breakdown of charges that made my blood pressure spike. "What the hell is this? You're billing me $4,000 for street light maintenance on Copper Ridge Road." "That's correct," Brenda said, pulling the clipboard back against her chest defensively. "Every homeowner who lives on Copper Ridge Road is being assessed their proportional share of the maintenance costs for the street lighting system. It's only fair that everyone contributes." I stood up from my chair, and I'm not a small man. 6'3", still broad-shouldered even at 67, and I could see Brenda take an involuntary step backward. "Brenda, I paved that road myself 30 years ago, with my own money, my own equipment, and my own 2 hands. There was no HOA back then. Hell, there were only 4 houses out here when I built mine," her mouth pinched into a thin line. "That may be, but the HOA was established 15 years ago, and all infrastructure within the development boundaries falls under our jurisdiction. The street lights were installed 8 years ago by the HOA, and you've been benefiting from them ever since without paying your fair share." "I never asked for those lights," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I was perfectly happy with the road the way it was." "Well, that's not how community living works, Mr. O'Brien. We all have to make sacrifices for the common good. The assessment is due within 30 days, or we'll be forced to place a lien on your property." She turned on her heel and started walking back down the driveway, clearly considering the conversation over. I stood there watching her go, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. 30 years ago, this land had been nothing but scrub brush and red dirt. I'd bought 5 acres for a song because nobody else wanted to be this far from town. I'd graded the road myself, laid the base, and paved it with asphalt I'd purchased wholesale from a supplier I'd worked with for decades. The road was a 1/4 mile long, running from the main highway up to where my house sat nestled against the hillside. Over the years, other people had bought parcels along that road and built their own homes. I'd never charged them a dime for using the road I'd built, never asked for anything in return. And now this woman was trying to bill me for improvements I never wanted on a road I'd constructed with my own sweat and money. I went back inside and called my son, Felix, who worked as a real estate attorney in Phoenix. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted. "Hey, Dad, what's up? I'm in the middle of reviewing a contract. I need your legal brain for a minute." "The HOA just tried to bill me $4 grand for street light maintenance on Copper Ridge Road." There was a pause, and I could hear papers shuffling. Wait, isn't that the road you built yourself back in the 90s? Exactly. I paved it in 1995, a full decade before the HOA even existed. Now this woman Brenda is trying to tell me I owe maintenance fees for lights they installed without my permission. Felix made a thoughtful sound. Do you have documentation proving you built the road? Original receipts, permits, anything like that? I've got everything. I keep all my construction records in the filing cabinets in the garage. I've got the property survey, the receipts for materials, even photos from when I was doing the work. Good. Don't pay them anything yet. Let me do some research on Arizona property law and HOA regulations. This sounds like it could be a case of the HOA overstepping their authority. I'll call you back tomorrow. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the day digging through my old files. The garage had become something of an archive over the years, with metal filing cabinets lining one wall and plastic storage bins stacked on industrial shelving. I found the folder labeled Copper Ridge Road Construction and pulled it out, blowing dust off the top. Inside were all the documents I'd accumulated during the project. The original property survey from 1994 showing the 5 acres I'd purchased. The site plan I'd drawn up myself, showing where the road would run and where I intended to build my house. Receipts from Southwest Asphalt Supply for 3 loads of hot mix asphalt, totaling almost $8,000. Receipts for the gravel base material. Photos I'd taken with my old film camera showing the raw dirt path, then the graded road bed, then the finished paved surface. There was even a copy of the building permit I'd pulled from Yavapai County for my house, which included a note about the private road access. The county had required me to meet certain minimum standards for the road width and grade, but they'd approved my plans without any issues. I laid everything out on my kitchen table and took photos with my phone, then sent them to Felix with a text. Found all the documentation. Call me when you can. The next morning, Felix called me back, and he sounded energized in a way that told me he'd found something interesting. Okay, Dad, I've been doing a deep dive into this, and I think you've got a really strong case. Arizona law is pretty clear that HOAs can't just claim ownership of private property or infrastructure without proper legal transfer. If you built that road on your own property with your own money before the HOA existed, they have no automatic right to control it or charge you for maintaining it. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. Here's the thing, though. We need to look at what happened when the HOA was formed. Do you remember signing any documents back then that might have transferred control of the road to the HOA? I thought back 15 years, trying to remember. The HOA was formed by some of the newer residents who wanted to establish community standards. I didn't really pay much attention to it because I figured it wouldn't affect me much. I might have signed some paperwork, but I don't remember anything about transferring the road. We need to get copies of all the HOA's formation documents and the CC and Articus, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. They should be on file with the county. I can request them, or you can go down to the county recorder's office and get copies yourself. I'll go down there today. The recorder's office is in Prescott, right? Yeah, at the county complex. Ask for all recorded documents related to the Copper Ridge Estates Homeowner Association. Also, get a copy of your current deed and any easement documents. We need to see exactly what legal rights exist on your property. I drove down to Prescott that afternoon. The county complex was a sprawling set of buildings near downtown, and the recorder's office was busy with people filing documents and requesting copies. I waited in line for 20 minutes before I got to speak with a clerk, a young woman with glasses who listened patiently as I explained what I needed. "Let me look that up in the system," she said, typing on her computer. "Copper Ridge Estates HOA, you said?" "That's right." "Formed around 2010 or 2011, I think." She scrolled through her screen, clicking occasionally. "Okay, I've got the formation documents here. Looks like they were filed in March 2011. And you want your property deed as well?" "Yes, and any easements or encumbrances on the property." She printed out a stack of documents that took about 10 minutes to compile. When she handed them to me, I paid the copying fee and took everything out to my truck. I sat in the parking lot and started reading through the papers, trying to make sense of the legal language. The HOA's Declaration of Covenants and Conditions was 50 pages of dense text. I skimmed through it, looking for any mention of roads or infrastructure. Finally, on page 32, I found a section titled Common Areas and Maintenance Responsibilities. It listed several things that would be considered common areas, including all streets, roads, and thoroughfares within the development boundaries, as designated on the recorded plat map. But here was the interesting part. The document referenced a specific plat map that had been recorded at the same time as the HOA formation. I flipped through the stack of papers until I found it. The plat map showed the boundaries of the Copper Ridge Estates development, and it included Copper Ridge Road within those boundaries. But the map had a note in small print at the bottom. Existing private roads shown for reference only. Property owners retain ownership and maintenance responsibilities unless otherwise transferred by separate instrument. I took a photo of that page and texted it to Felix with a message. Found something interesting in the plat map notes. He called me 5 minutes later. "Dad, this is perfect." That note basically confirms that your road remained private property unless you specifically signed something transferring it to the HOA. "Did you find any separate transfer documents in that stack?" I flipped through the remaining pages. "No, nothing like that. Just the HOA formation stuff and my deed, which doesn't mention any transfers either." "Okay, this is good. The HOA is claiming authority they don't legally have. I'm going to draft a response letter for you to send to Brenda and the HOA board. We'll cite the relevant statutes and make it clear that you're not paying this assessment because they have no legal basis to charge you for maintenance on your private road. What if they don't back down? Then we'll file a lawsuit if necessary. But my guess is that once they see we have solid documentation and legal grounds, they'll drop it. Most HOA boards don't actually want to go to court because it's expensive, and they know their insurance won't cover legal fees for something this questionable. Felix sent me the draft letter that evening by email. It was beautifully written, professional but firm, laying out the facts and the legal reasoning in clear terms. He cited Arizona revised statutes about property rights and HOA authority, and he attached copies of all the documentation showing I'd built the road myself before the HOA existed. I printed out the letter, signed it, and mailed it to the HOA the next day via certified mail so I'd have proof they received it. A week went by without any response. I started to think maybe they'd taken the hint and would leave me alone. Then, on a Tuesday morning, I got a knock on my door. When I answered, it wasn't Brenda standing there. It was a man in his 40s wearing a polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest. "Mr. O'Brien, I'm Dale Hutchins, the HOA's property manager. I was hoping we could talk about this situation with the road assessment." I opened the door wider and gestured for him to come in. "Sure, let's talk. Can I get you some coffee?" "That'd be great, thanks." We sat at my kitchen table and Dale pulled out a folder with more papers in it. He seemed less confrontational than Brenda, more interested in actually having a conversation. "Look, I've been reviewing your letter and the documentation you provided. I'll be honest, I wasn't aware of the history of Copper Ridge Road when Brenda initiated this assessment. She's new to the board and has been pretty aggressive about trying to collect fees for various things. So you agree I shouldn't have to pay?" Dale hesitated. "I think the situation is more complicated than Brenda initially presented it. You're right that you built the road originally. But the HOA did install those street lights 8 years ago, and they have been maintaining them. The electricity costs alone run about $600 a year for that stretch of road. I never asked for those lights, Dale. I was perfectly happy with the road the way it was. If the HOA wanted to install lights, they should have asked the property owners first and gotten our agreement to share the costs. I understand your position, but from the HOA's perspective, the lights were installed for safety and security reasons. They benefit all the residents on that road, including you." I leaned back in my chair. "Tell me something, Dale. Did the HOA get my permission before installing those lights? Did they send me a letter, call a meeting, ask for my input?" He looked down at his folder. "I don't have records of any formal notification to property owners before the installation, but that was before my time as property manager. So the HOA made a unilateral decision to install improvements on my private road without consulting me, and now they want to charge me for it retroactively. That doesn't seem right." Dale sighed. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. O'Brien. I think Brenda may have overstepped here, but she's dug her heels in on this issue. She's convinced that the HOA has the authority to charge all residents for common area improvements, and she's not backing down easily. Then I guess we'll have to let the courts decide. I'd like to avoid that if possible. Legal battles are expensive for everyone involved. What if we could reach some kind of compromise?" I shook my head. "This isn't about the money, Dale. It's about the principle. I built that road with my own hands and my own money. I've let all my neighbors use it free of charge for decades. Now the HOA comes along and tries to assert control over something they had no part in creating. That's not a compromise situation. That's a matter of property rights." Dale gathered up his papers and stood. "I understand. I'll report back to the board. But I have to warn you, Brenda is not going to let this go easily. She's already talking about pursuing legal action to enforce the assessment. Let her try. My son is a real estate attorney, and he's reviewed all the documentation. We're confident in our legal position." After Dale left, I sat at the kitchen table feeling frustrated and tired. I'd spent my whole career building things, creating something tangible and useful with hard work. I'd never been the type to get involved in neighborhood politics or bureaucratic nonsense. Now, in what was supposed to be my peaceful retirement, I was being dragged into a fight I never wanted. That evening, Felix called to check in. "How'd the meeting with the property manager go?" "About like you'd expect. He seems like a reasonable guy, but Brenda is pushing hard on this. They want me to compromise and pay something." "Don't pay them anything, Dad. Not a dime. Once you start making payments, it could be seen as acknowledging their authority to charge you. We need to stand firm on this." That's what I told him, but he warned me that Brenda is talking about taking legal action. Let her. Seriously, I've been doing more research on this, and I found several Arizona court cases that are directly relevant. There's established precedent that HOAs can't retroactively claim authority over infrastructure that predated their formation without explicit transfer of ownership. We'd win this case hands down. 2 weeks later, I received another certified letter from the HOA. This one was from a law firm in Scottsdale, informing me that I had violated the HOA's covenants and conditions by failing to pay the assessed fees. The letter demanded payment of the original $4,000, plus an additional $500 in late fees and administrative costs. It gave me 15 days to pay before they would file a lien on my property. I drove down to Phoenix that same day to meet with Felix at his office. He worked for a mid-sized firm that specialized in real estate and property law, and his office was on the 20th floor of a glass tower in the financial district. The view from his window looked out over the sprawling desert city, mountains visible in the hazy distance. "This is getting ridiculous," I said, tossing the letter onto his desk. "They hired a lawyer to threaten me." Felix picked up the letter and read it, his expression growing more annoyed as he continued. "This is a standard intimidation tactic. The law firm they hired, Morrison and Associates, they're known for doing HOA enforcement work. They send scary letters to try to get people to pay up without actually going to court. So what do? We call their bluff. I'm going to draft a response that makes it very clear we're prepared to fight this, and that we'll be seeking attorney fees and damages if they continue with this frivolous action. Arizona law allows property owners to recover costs if an HOA pursues a case without legal merit. Can they really put a lien on my property? They can try, but if we challenge it, a court would likely remove it. The bigger concern is that this could drag on for months and cost both sides a lot of money. I'm hoping that once their attorney sees our documentation and legal analysis, they'll advise the HOA to drop it." Felix spent the next hour drafting a detailed response letter. He walked me through each section, explaining the legal reasoning. He cited Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 33-1619, which limited HOA authority to genuinely common areas. He referenced several court cases, including one from 2008, where an Arizona appellate court had ruled that an HOA couldn't claim authority over roads that had been built by individual property owners before the HOA's formation. The key case here is Martinez versus Verde Valley Estates, HOA, Felix explained. The facts are almost identical to your situation. Martinez had built a road on his property. The HOA was formed later and tried to claim control over the road, and the court ruled that the HOA had no authority because Martinez had never transferred ownership or control. The court specifically said that HOAs can't just declare something to be a common area if it's actually private property. So we should win. If it goes to court, yes, I'm very confident we'd win. The question is whether the HOA and their lawyer will realize that before wasting everyone's time and money. Felix sent the response letter, and this time we didn't have to wait long for a reaction. 3 days later, he got a phone call from the attorney at Morrison and Associates. They had a 30-minute conversation that Felix later described to me as contentious but productive. Their lawyer, a guy named Richard Morrison, tried to argue that the HOA had implicit authority over all roads within the development boundaries. I walked him through our documentation and the Martinez case, and I could tell he wasn't happy. He said he'd discuss it with his client and get back to me. Do you think they'll back down? Hard to say. Morrison is getting paid either way, so he might encourage them to fight just to rack up billable hours. But if he's ethical, he should be advising the HOA that they're going to lose. Another week passed. I tried to go about my normal life, working in my garden and doing some maintenance projects around the house, but the HOA situation kept nagging at the back of my mind. I'd wake up at night thinking about it, getting angry all over again at the injustice of being charged for something I'd created myself. Then, Brenda showed up at my door again. This time she had another woman with her, someone I vaguely recognized from neighborhood events. The woman was younger than Brenda, maybe in her late 30s, with highlighted blonde hair and an expression of barely concealed hostility. "Mr. O'Brien, this is Kimberly Zimmerman. She's also on the HOA board and we need to discuss this situation," Brenda said without preamble. I crossed my arms and stayed in the doorway, not inviting them in. "I don't think we have anything to discuss. My attorney has responded to your attorney. If you want to communicate with me, do it through proper legal channels." Kimberly stepped forward. "Listen, we're trying to be reasonable here. The HOA has costs to cover and everyone needs to pay their fair share. We're willing to reduce the assessment if you pay promptly. Say $3,000 instead of $4,500. "I'm not paying anything," I said flatly. "I built that road, I own it. You have no authority to charge me for improvements I never authorized." Brenda's face flushed red. "You know, Mr. O'Brien, this kind of selfish attitude is exactly what's wrong with this community. We're trying to maintain standards and keep property values high, and people like you just want to freeload off everyone else's efforts." I felt my temper rising but kept my voice level. "Freeload? I built the road you're all driving on, for free. I let all of you use infrastructure I paid for and never asked for a penny in return. And now you have the nerve to call me a freeloader." "The HOA installed those lights for everyone's benefit," Kimberly said. "You're using them just like everyone else." "I have a motion sensor light on my own garage that illuminates my driveway just fine. I don't need your street lights. I never asked for them. You installed them without my permission on what is legally my private road." Brenda pulled out her phone and started tapping on it. "We'll see what the judge has to say about that. Come on, Kimberly. We're done trying to be nice." They turned and walked back to Brenda's car, a white Lexus SUV that probably cost more than I'd spent building my entire house. I called Felix immediately after they left. Brenda and another board member just showed up at my house trying to intimidate me into paying. They offered to reduce the amount if I paid quickly. That's harassment, and it's not appropriate. I'm going to send another letter to their attorney making it clear that all communication needs to go through proper legal channels. In the meantime, I think we should take the offensive here. I want to file a declaratory judgment action." "What's that?" "It's a lawsuit where we ask the court to declare what the legal rights are in this situation. We'd be asking the judge to officially rule that you own Copper Ridge Road and that the HOA has no authority over it. That way, we're not just playing defense. We're forcing them to either defend their position in court or back down." "How much is that going to cost?" "I'll do the work it cost for you, Dad. Figure about $5,000 in legal fees and court costs. But if we win, and we should, the court can order the HOA to pay your attorney fees." "Let's do it. I'm tired of being pushed around by these people." Felix filed the lawsuit the following week. The complaint was a straightforward legal document laying out the facts. I had purchased the property in 1994, built Copper Ridge Road in 1995 using my own funds and labor, never transferred ownership or control of the road to anyone else, and the HOA was formed in 2011 with no authority over my private road. We asked the court to issue a declaratory judgment confirming my ownership rights and permanently enjoining the HOA from attempting to charge me fees related to the road. We also included a counterclaim for harassment and abuse of process, seeking damages and attorney fees. The HOA had to respond to the lawsuit within 30 days. When their response came, it was clear they were doubling down on their position. Their answer claimed that, when I had signed the HOA documents in 2011, I had implicitly agreed to transfer control of all roads within the development boundaries to the HOA. They argued that the street lights were a valid improvement to common area infrastructure, and that I was obligated to pay my share of maintenance costs. "This is ridiculous," I said to Felix as we reviewed their response. "I never agreed to transfer anything. I barely even read those HOA documents when I signed them. I thought it was just about keeping yards clean and noise levels down." "That's exactly the point we're going to make. There's a legal principle called clear and unambiguous language. If the HOA wanted you to transfer ownership of your private road, they needed to say that explicitly in language that would be clear to a reasonable person. They can't hide it in fine print or claim it was implicit." The case was assigned to Judge Margaret Thornton in Yavapai County Superior Court. The first hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, just a preliminary conference where the judge would hear from both sides and set a schedule for the case. I drove down to the courthouse in Prescott on the morning of the hearing, meeting Felix in the parking lot. He was wearing a suit and carrying a leather briefcase, looking every inch the professional attorney. I put on my best slacks and a button-down shirt, feeling underdressed next to him. "Just be yourself in there," Felix advised as we walked into the building. "If the judge asks you questions, answer them honestly and directly. Don't exaggerate, don't get angry, just tell the truth." The courtroom was a modern space with wood paneling and fluorescent lighting. Judge Thornton was a woman in her late 50s with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had a reputation for being smart and no nonsense, according to Felix. The HOA was represented by Richard Morrison, the attorney from Scottsdale. He was a heavy-set man in an expensive-looking suit who seemed annoyed to be there. Brenda sat at the defendant's table next to him. Along with Kimberly and another man, I didn't recognize who was apparently also on the HOA board. Judge Thornton called the case and asked each side to give a brief summary of their position. Felix went first, laying out the facts clearly and concisely. When he got to the part about me building the road myself, the judge looked up from her notes with interest. "Mr. O'Brien physically constructed this road himself?" she asked. "With his own equipment and materials?" "Yes, Your Honor. My father was a construction contractor for over 40 years. He purchased the materials wholesale and did all the grading and paving work himself. We have extensive documentation including receipts, photos, and the original county permits." "And when was this?" 1995, Your Honor. The HOA wasn't formed until 2011, 16 years later. Judge Thornton made some notes and then turned to Morrison. "Counsel, what's your response to that?" Morrison stood. "Your Honor, while it's true that Mr. O'Brien may have initially constructed the road, once the HOA was properly formed and he became a member, all infrastructure within the development boundaries came under HOA control. The covenants and conditions clearly state that the HOA has authority over all roads and common areas." "Do the CC and Artiques specifically mention Copper Ridge Road?" the judge asked. "They refer generally to all roads within the development boundaries, Your Honor." "But do they specifically identify Copper Ridge Road as a common area that Mr. O'Brien was transferring to HOA control?" Morrison hesitated. "Not in those exact words, Your Honor, but the intent is clear." "The intent is clear to you, counsel, but the law requires clear and unambiguous language when it comes to property transfers. I'm going to set this for a full evidentiary hearing. I want to see all the documentation from both sides. Mr. O'Brien's original construction records, the HOA formation documents, everything. This is scheduled for 10 weeks from today. Both parties should be prepared to present witnesses and evidence." We left the courthouse feeling cautiously optimistic. "That went well," Felix said as we walked to our cars. "The judge is clearly skeptical of the HOA's position. Did you see her reaction when I mentioned you built the road yourself? She gets it. So what happens now? Now we prepare for the evidentiary hearing. I'll need you to gather all your original documents. I'm also going to depose some of the HOA board members, including Brenda. We need to establish that they never gave you clear notice that you'd be transferring ownership of the road. Over the next several weeks, Felix did exactly that. He scheduled depositions with Brenda, Kimberly, and Dale Hutchins, the property manager. I didn't attend those depositions, but Felix told me afterward that they'd been revealing. Brenda was a disaster as a witness, he said. She got defensive and argumentative. She kept insisting that the HOA has authority to do whatever they want, but she couldn't cite any specific legal basis for it. When I asked her to show me where in the CC and Articus it says that your road became HOA property, she couldn't point to anything specific. What about Dale? He was more honest. He admitted that the HOA probably should have consulted with property owners before installing the street lights. He also confirmed that there's no record of anyone ever asking you to transfer ownership of the road to the HOA. Felix also deposed me, just to prepare for the hearing. He asked me detailed questions about building the road, about what I remembered from when the HOA was formed, about my interactions with Brenda and the board. It felt strange being questioned by my own son in such a formal way, but he explained it was good practice for the real hearing. The weeks crawled by. I tried to stay busy, but the lawsuit dominated my thoughts. I'd invested a lot of money and emotional energy into this fight, and I couldn't help but worry about what would happen if we lost. Would they really put a lien on my house? Could I be forced to pay thousands of dollars for something I fundamentally believed was unjust? Finally, the day of the evidentiary hearing arrived. Felix had prepared meticulously, organizing all our documents into neat binders with tabs and exhibits. We arrived at the courthouse early and set up at the plaintiff's table, spreading out our materials. The HOA's side looked less organized. Morrison arrived with a single briefcase, and Brenda looked nervous. They'd apparently decided not to bring any other board members as witnesses. Judge Thornton took the bench and looked out at both parties. All right, we're here for the evidentiary hearing in O'Brien versus Copper Ridge Estates Homeowner Association. Mr. O'Brien, since you're the plaintiff, you'll present your case first. Felix stood. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to call my father, Franklin O'Brien, as our first witness. I walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. Felix took me through my testimony methodically. He asked me about buying the property in 1994, about my background in construction, about the decision to build the road. Why did you decide to pave the road yourself rather than leaving it as dirt? Felix asked. Well, the county required some kind of all-weather access to the property before they'd issue a building permit for the house. A dirt road would have been cheaper, but I knew from experience that dirt roads in this area turn to mud in the rain and dust bowls in the summer. I wanted something permanent and solid. Plus, I had the skills and the connections to get materials at cost, so it made sense to do it right. And how much did it cost you to build the road? About $12,000 total, which was a lot of money back in 1995. That covered the gravel base, the asphalt, and the rental of some equipment I didn't own. Felix introduced the receipts and photos into evidence, walking me through each one. There were pictures of me operating a small bulldozer to grade the roadbed, images of the gravel being spread and compacted, and photos of the asphalt being laid down in smooth black strips. In some of the photos, I looked impossibly young, my hair still dark brown instead of the gray it was now. Did you ever transfer ownership or control of this road to anyone else? Felix asked. No, never. It's always been my private road on my private property. When the HOA was formed in 2011, do you remember signing any documents? I signed something, but honestly, I didn't read it carefully. My wife had just passed away the year before, and I wasn't paying much attention to neighborhood politics. I thought it was just standard stuff about keeping yards maintained and not parking RVs in driveways. Did anyone from the HOA ever explicitly tell you that you'd be transferring ownership of Copper Ridge Road to them? Absolutely not. If they had, I never would have signed anything. Morrison cross-examined me, trying to poke holes in my story. Mr. O'Brien, isn't it true that you've benefited from the street lights the HOA installed? I suppose the lights are there, but I never asked for them and I don't need them. I have my own lighting. But you don't deny that the lights illuminate the road you use every day. They illuminate a road I built myself and maintained for decades before the HOA even existed. You think it's fair that other residents should have to pay for lighting that you get to use for free. I think it's fair that I should have been consulted before anyone installed anything on my private property. And I think it's fair that I not be charged for improvements I never authorized. Morrison pressed on, but I could tell he wasn't making much headway. Felix had prepared me well for the kinds of questions that might come up. After my testimony, Felix called an expert witness, a surveyor named Tom Rodriguez who had reviewed all the property records and created a detailed map showing exactly where Copper Ridge Road sat relative to property boundaries. Tom testified that the road was entirely within my property lines and had never been deeded to anyone else. Based on your review of the records, Mr. Rodriguez, is there any indication that ownership of this road was ever transferred to the HOA? Felix asked. No, none whatsoever. The property lines haven't changed since 1994, and there's no recorded easement or transfer of any kind. Morrison tried to cross-examine Tom, but there wasn't much he could challenge. The property records were clear and unambiguous. Then it was the HOA's turn to present their case. Morrison called Brenda as his first witness. She took the stand looking defiant, her chin raised like she was preparing for battle. Morrison walked her through the HOA's formation, the installation of the street lights, and the decision to assess property owners for maintenance costs. Mrs. Patterson, why did the HOA decide to install streetlights on Copper Ridge Road? Morrison asked. For safety reasons. Several residents had complained that the road was too dark at night and they felt unsafe. The board voted to install lighting along all the streets in the development. And how were the costs for these lights to be covered? Through assessments to the property owners who benefited from them. That's standard practice for HOAs. Did Mr. O'Brien ever object to the lights being installed? Not at the time, no. Felix stood for cross-examination, and I could see a slight smile on his face. Mrs. Patterson, you said Mr. O'Brien didn't object when the lights were installed. Did you actually notify him beforehand that the HOA was planning to install lights on his private road? Brenda shifted in her seat. We sent out a newsletter to all residents about upcoming improvements. You have a copy of that newsletter. Not with me, no. Did the newsletter specifically mention that lights would be installed on Copper Ridge Road? I'm not sure of the exact wording. Did you hold a meeting where property owners on Copper Ridge Road were invited to discuss the lighting installation and its costs? We have regular board meetings that all residents are invited to attend. That's not what I asked. Did you hold a specific meeting about improvements to Copper Ridge Road where Mr. O'Brien and the other property owners on that road were directly invited and asked for their input? Brenda's face flushed. No, but that's not required. Let me ask you this, Mrs. Patterson. When you joined the HOA board 3 months ago, did you review the history of Copper Ridge Road? Did you look into who built it and who owns it? I assumed it was an HOA road like all the others. Did you do any actual research to verify that assumption? I relied on information from previous board members. You have any written documentation showing that Mr. O'Brien ever agreed to transfer ownership or control of his private road to the HOA? It's in the CC and Articus. He signed them. Can you point to the specific language in the CC and Articus that says, and I quote, "Franklin O'Brien hereby transfers ownership of Copper Ridge Road to the Homeowner Association"? Brenda was silent for a moment. It doesn't say that exactly, but it's implied. Implied. So there's no clear, explicit language stating that private roads built by property owners before the HOA's formation would automatically become HOA property. The CC and Articus say the HOA has authority over all roads in the development. Mrs. Patterson, if I own a car and I join a car club, does that car club automatically own my car just because their rules say they govern all cars? Morrison objected. Argumentative, Your Honor. Judge Thornton sustained the objection, but I could see she was paying close attention to the exchange. Felix had made his point. After Brenda stepped down, Morrison called Dale Hutchins. Dale was a more measured witness, acknowledging some of the problems with the HOA's position. Mr. Hutchins, in your professional opinion as a property manager, should the HOA have consulted more directly with Mr. O'Brien before installing lights on his road? Felix asked during cross-examination. Dale hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. In hindsight, yes, that probably would have been better. And in your experience, is it common practice for HOAs to claim ownership of infrastructure that was built by individual property owners before the HOA existed? No, that's not typical. Usually, there needs to be some kind of explicit transfer or dedication of property. Morrison tried to rehabilitate his witness on redirect, but the damage was done. Even the HOA's own property manager was admitting they'd overstepped. After both sides rested, Judge Thornton asked for closing arguments. Felix went first, summarizing the evidence clearly and pointing to the legal principles at stake. Your Honor, this case is about basic property rights. My father bought land, built a road on that land with his own money and labor, and has maintained ownership of that road for 30 years. The HOA was formed later and has tried to claim authority they simply don't have. There's no deed, no easement, no explicit transfer of any kind. The CC and Articus contain only vague, general language that doesn't clearly inform property owners that they're giving up their private property. Under Arizona law, that's not sufficient. We ask the court to declare that Mr. O'Brien owns Copper Ridge Road and that the HOA has no authority to charge him fees for maintaining it. We also ask for attorney fees and costs, as this action by the HOA was without legal merit and has caused my father significant expense and stress. Morrison's closing was less effective. He kept returning to the idea that HOAs need broad authority to function effectively, but he couldn't get around the fundamental problem that the HOA had never actually taken formal ownership of the road. Judge Thornton took about 10 minutes to review her notes after the closings. Then she looked up and addressed the courtroom. I'm prepared to rule from the bench on this matter. I've reviewed all the evidence and the relevant case law, and I find the facts to be quite clear. Mr. O'Brien built Copper Ridge Road in 1995 using his own funds and labor. The road sits entirely on his private property. When the HOA was formed in 2011, there was no explicit transfer of ownership or control of this road to the HOA. the CC and Articles, contain general language about HOA authority over roads, but this language is not sufficient to effect a transfer of private property. Under Arizona law, including the precedent established in Martinez versus Verde Valley Estates, an HOA cannot simply declare private property to be a common area without an explicit, unambiguous transfer. I felt my heart pounding as she continued. Furthermore, I find that the HOA should have consulted directly with Mr. O'Brien before installing improvements on his private property. The fact that they failed to do so does not give them the right to now charge him for those improvements retroactively. I'm going to issue a declaratory judgment in favor of Mr. O'Brien, confirming his ownership of Copper Ridge Road and permanently enjoining the HOA from attempting to charge him fees related to that road. I'm also awarding attorney fees and costs to Mr. O'Brien, to be paid by the HOA. I'll issue a written order within the next week with the specific amounts. Brenda's face had gone pale. Kimberly was whispering urgently to Morrison, who was gathering his papers with tight, controlled movements. Felix shook my hand, grinning. "We won, Dad," unambiguously. "Thank you, son. I couldn't have done this without you." As we left the courtroom, I saw Brenda standing in the hallway, her arms crossed and her expression furious. She glared at me as I walked past but didn't say anything. Kimberly was with her, and they were having an intense conversation with Morrison. In the parking lot, Felix and I stood by our cars, both of us feeling the weight of relief after months of stress. "What happens now?" I asked. "The judge will issue a formal written order. The HOA will have to pay your attorney fees, which should be around $6,000 or $7,000. And they can never try to charge you for that road again. It's over, Dad. You won." The judge's written order came a week later, and it was even more comprehensive than I'd hoped. Not only did she declare that I owned Copper Ridge Road, but she also included language stating that the HOA had acted in bad faith by pursuing the assessment without proper legal basis. She awarded Felix $8,300 in attorney fees and costs, which would come out of the HOA's budget. I thought that would be the end of it. But 3 weeks later, I got a call from Dale Hutchins, the property manager. "Mr. O'Brien, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Brenda is no longer president of the HOA board. She was voted out at an emergency meeting last night." "Really? Why?" "A lot of the residents were angry when they found out the HOA had to pay your attorney fees out of the general fund. That's money that was supposed to go toward playground equipment and landscaping. Plus, once people learned the details of the case, they realized Brenda had really overstepped. There were calls for her to resign, and when she refused, the board voted to remove her. I'm not going to lie, Dale. That doesn't exactly break my heart. I understand. I also wanted to let you know that the new board president, a guy named Marcus Feldman, wants to meet with you. He'd like to clear the air and make sure there are no hard feelings going forward." I agreed to meet with Marcus, mostly out of curiosity. He came by my house a few days later, a pleasant man in his 60s who'd retired from a career in education. We sat on my front porch, the same place where this whole mess had started months ago. "Mr. O'Brien, I want to apologize on behalf of the HOA," Marcus said. "What Brenda did was wrong, and it never should have gotten to the point of a lawsuit. You built that road, you own it, and we had no business trying to charge you for improvements you never requested. I appreciate that, Marcus. I don't have any ill will toward the HOA in general. I just couldn't let someone push me around on a matter of principle. I completely understand. I want you to know that we're going to remove those street lights from your section of Copper Ridge Road unless you'd like them to stay." I thought about it. "Actually, you can leave them. I don't need them, but I suppose they don't hurt anything either. Just don't ever try to charge me for them." Marcus laughed. "Trust me, that's not going to happen again. We've learned our lesson." We talked for a while longer, and I found myself actually liking the guy. He seemed genuinely interested in making the HOA a positive force in the community rather than an authoritarian nightmare. After Marcus left, I sat on my porch watching the sun set over the red rocks of Sedona. The whole ordeal had taken nearly 6 months of my life, cost me stress and sleep and energy I couldn't really afford at my age. But I'd stood up for what was right, and I'd won. My road, the road I'd built with my own hands 30 years ago, was still mine. No one could take that away. Felix called that evening to check in. "How'd the meeting with the new HOA president go?" "Good, actually. He apologized and said they're going to leave me alone from now on." "I think we made our point." "You definitely did. You know, Dad, this case is probably going to be cited by other attorneys in HOA disputes. You've established some important precedent here. I just wanted to keep what was mine. But if it helps other people fight back against overreaching HOAs, that's a bonus." Over the next few months, life slowly returned to normal. I got back to my retirement routines, working in the garden, doing projects around the house, occasionally driving into town for coffee with old friends. Whenever I drove up Copper Ridge Road, though, I felt a little surge of satisfaction. That road represented more than just asphalt and gravel. It represented hard work, self-reliance, and the fundamental American principle that a person has a right to their own property. I ran into Brenda one more time, about 6 months after the court case ended. I was at the grocery store in the village of Oak Creek, pushing my cart down the produce aisle, when I saw her selecting avocados. She saw me at the same moment, and for a second I thought she might just turn and walk away. Instead, she came over to me. "Mr. O'Brien," she said stiffly, "Brenda, I want you to know that I still believe the HOA was in the right. You may have won in court, but that doesn't mean you were morally correct. Communities need rules and shared responsibilities." I set down the tomatoes I'd been examining and looked at her directly. "Brenda, I've been part of this community longer than almost anyone else out here. I built my house when this was empty desert. I created the road that allowed other people to build here. I've never asked for anything from my neighbors, never complained, never made demands. When you tried to charge me for your street lights, it wasn't about community responsibility. It was about you asserting power you didn't have over something you didn't build. There's a difference between being part of a community and being bullied by people who think they know better than everyone else." Her face flushed, but before she could respond, I picked up my tomatoes and pushed my cart past her toward the checkout. I didn't have anything more to say to her, and she clearly wasn't interested in actually listening. As I drove home that day, back up Copper Ridge Road, I thought about what community really meant. It wasn't about HOA boards and enforcement and fees. It was about people looking out for each other, helping when needed, respecting boundaries, and building things together when it made sense. I'd been doing that for 30 years without any formal structure telling me how. Felix came up to visit a few weeks later, bringing his wife and my 2 grandkids. We had a barbecue in the backyard, and after dinner, Felix and I sat on the porch while the kids played in the yard and his wife chatted with my neighbor across the street. "You know, Dad, I've been thinking about your case a lot," Felix said. "It really does represent something important about property rights and individual liberty. You stood up to institutional power and won. I just didn't want to get pushed around. That's exactly the point. Most people would have just paid the fee rather than fight. They would have figured it wasn't worth the hassle, or they'd have been intimidated by the legal threats. But you fought on principle, And you showed that individuals can still win against organizations that overreach. I took a sip of my beer and looked out at the road, illuminated now by the street lights that had caused all this trouble. Your grandfather used to tell me that the most important thing a man can do is stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He lived through the Depression, fought in World War II, came home and built a life from nothing. He taught me that work has value, that what you build with your own hands means something, and that you never let anyone take from you what you've earned honestly. You passed those lessons on to me too, Felix said. That's why I was so motivated to win this case. It wasn't just about the money or the legal principles. It was about defending what you'd built, literally and figuratively. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the desert sky turn purple and gold as the sun set behind the mountains. My grandkids were laughing as they chased each other around the yard, their voices carrying in the clear evening air. "Do you think you'll ever have any more trouble with the HOA?" Felix asked. "I doubt it. Marcus seems like a reasonable guy, and I think the rest of the board learned their lesson when they had to pay $8,000 in legal fees. Besides, the court order is pretty clear. They can't touch my road. What if they try something else? Some HOAs can be pretty creative with finding ways to harass people they don't like. Then I'll deal with it. I'm not going to live in fear of my own homeowner association, and if they do try something, I know a pretty good lawyer." Felix laughed. "Yeah, I suppose you do." The next year passed peacefully. The HOA left me alone, and I heard through the grapevine that Marcus was doing a good job as president, focusing on actual community improvements rather than enforcement actions. They installed new playground equipment at the neighborhood park, organized a community yard sale, and started a monthly newsletter that actually contained useful information instead of threats about rule violations. I even started going to some of the HOA meetings, just to keep an eye on things and make sure they weren't planning anything that might affect me. Marcus always greeted me warmly, and several of the other residents thanked me for standing up to Brenda. Apparently, she'd been targeting other people too before the board removed her, and my victory had emboldened others to push back against questionable fees and rules. One person who thanked me was an elderly woman named Dorothy who lived 3 houses down from me. She came up to me after one meeting and said, "Mr. O'Brien, I want you to know how grateful I am for what you did. Brenda was trying to fine me $500 for having the wrong color flowers in my front yard. Can you imagine? After you won your case and she was removed from the board, Marcus canceled all those ridiculous fines. You saved me a lot of money and stress. I'm glad it worked out, Dorothy. Nobody should be harassed in their own home." These conversations reminded me that the fight had been worth it, not just for me, but for everyone in the community who might have been bullied by an overreaching HOA board. I also started talking to some of the newer residents who'd moved in along Copper Ridge Road over the past few years. Several of them didn't know the history of the road, that I'd built it myself decades ago. When they found out, they were amazed and appreciative. One young couple, David and Jenny, who just bought a house at the far end of the road, invited me over for dinner to thank me. "We had no idea you built this road yourself," Jenny said as we ate on their back patio. "That's incredible. You basically made it possible for all of us to live here." "I just built what I needed at the time," I said. "I'm glad other people have been able to benefit from it." "Still," David said, "it's pretty remarkable. Most people wouldn't have gone to that effort or had the skills to do it. And then to fight the HOA to protect your property rights, that takes real courage." These interactions gave me a renewed sense of connection to my community. The fight with the HOA hadn't been fun, but it had reminded me why I'd chosen to live here in the first place. Sedona was full of independent-minded people who valued freedom and self-reliance, and most of them understood and respected what I'd done. 2 years after the court case ended, I was sitting on my porch one morning when I saw Marcus walking up the driveway. He was carrying a folder and had a somewhat official expression on his face. "Morning, Marcus. What brings you by?" "Morning, Franklin. I wanted to talk to you about something, and I thought it was better to do it in person rather than send a letter." My guard went up immediately. "What's this about?" "Nothing bad, I promise. The board has been discussing road maintenance throughout the development, and we wanted to get your input on something." "I'm listening." Marcus opened his folder and pulled out some documents. "Several of the other roads in the development are starting to show their age. They need resurfacing, and it's going to be expensive. We're looking at about $80,000 to repave all the HOA-owned roads. Now, obviously, we're not asking you to contribute to that since Copper Ridge Road is your private property. But some of the board members suggested we should see if you'd be willing to let the HOA take over maintenance of your road in exchange for covering the cost of resurfacing it when it eventually needs it." I leaned back in my rocking chair and studied Marcus. "Let me make sure I understand. You want me to give up ownership of my road so the HOA can maintain it?" "Not ownership exactly. More like you'd be granting the HOA an easement for maintenance purposes. You'd still own the underlying property, but the HOA would take responsibility for keeping the road in good condition." "And what would I get out of this deal?" "You wouldn't have to pay for resurfacing when the time comes. That could save you $15,000 or $20,000 down the line." I thought about it for a moment. "Marcus, I appreciate you coming to me with this directly and not just sending a letter. But I'm going to decline. That road is mine, and I intend to keep it that way. I've maintained it for 30 years, and I can keep maintaining it for however long I've got left." Marcus nodded, not seeming surprised. "I figured that's what you'd say, but I wanted to ask. The offer stands if you ever change your mind." "I won't, but I appreciate the respect you're showing by asking instead of just trying to take it." After Marcus left, I sat on the porch thinking about the offer. Part of me understood the logic of it. I was 69 years old now, and maintaining a quarter-mile of asphalt road wasn't going to get easier as I aged. Eventually, the road would need major repairs that would be expensive and physically demanding. But I'd fought too hard to keep my ownership rights to give them up voluntarily now. That road represented my independence, my ability to build something valuable and maintain control of it. As long as I was able, I'd take care of it myself. And if the day came when I couldn't anymore, well, I'd deal with that when it happened. Maybe I'd hire it out. Maybe Felix would help me figure out a solution. But I wouldn't hand over control to an HOA, even a reasonable one led by someone like Marcus. Over the next few years, I kept up with routine maintenance on the road. I'd fill cracks with rubberized asphalt sealant every fall, and I'd use my riding lawn mower to keep the edges trimmed. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was satisfying in a way that's hard to explain. Every time I drove up that road, I knew I'd created it and preserved it through my own efforts. Felix and his family came to visit regularly, and my grandkids grew from elementary school age into teenagers. They'd heard the story of my fight with the HOA many times, and it had become part of our family lore. My grandson, who was named Franklin after me, once told me he'd written about it for a school essay on standing up for what you believe in. The teacher said it was a great example of individual rights versus institutional power. Young Franklin said proudly, "I got an A. That's great, son. Just remember, it's not about being stubborn for its own sake. It's about knowing when something is important enough to fight for." When I turned 75, Felix started gently suggesting that maybe I should think about moving to a smaller place, something easier to maintain. I shut down that conversation pretty quickly. I'd built my house, just like I'd built my road, and I wasn't leaving unless someone carried me out in a box. But I did start thinking about what would happen to the property eventually. Felix would inherit it, of course, along with everything I owned. Would he want to keep the house? Would he maintain the road? Or would he end up selling to someone else, someone who might not understand or care about the history? I didn't have answers to those questions, and I tried not to worry about them too much. I'd done what I could do during my time. The rest would have to take care of itself. One afternoon, I was working in my garage when a car pulled up. A young man got out, maybe in his late 20s, wearing jeans and a polo shirt. He walked up the driveway with a friendly smile. "Mr. O'Brien, my name is Justin Miller. I'm a reporter with the Sedona Red Rock News. I was hoping I could talk to you about your case against the HOA a few years back." "What about it?" "That was settled years ago." "I know, but we're doing a series of articles about property rights and HOA overreach in Arizona. Your case has become pretty well known in legal circles, and I thought our readers would be interested in hearing your perspective." I was hesitant at first, but Justin seemed genuine and respectful. I invited him to sit on the porch, and we talked for over an hour. He asked thoughtful questions about why I'd built the road, what had motivated me to fight the HOA, and what I thought people should know about protecting their property rights. "A lot of people don't realize how much power HOAs can have," I told him. "They can put liens on your property, fine you, even foreclose in some cases. And some HOA boards let that power go to their heads. They start thinking they're little kingdoms and homeowners are their subjects. But at the end of the day, people have fundamental rights to their property, and those rights can't be taken away without due process and clear legal authority." "Do you think HOAs serve any legitimate purpose?" Justin asked. "Sure, they can. When they focus on reasonable things like maintaining common areas, organizing community events, and mediating disputes, they can be valuable. The problem is when they overstep and start trying to control every aspect of how people live in their own homes. There's got to be a balance between community standards and individual liberty." The article came out 2 weeks later, and it was fair and well written. Justin had captured the essence of the story without sensationalizing it. He'd also interviewed Marcus and a couple of other residents, including Dorothy, the woman who'd been fined for her flower colors. After the article was published, I got several phone calls from people in other parts of Arizona who were dealing with their own HOA problems. Some wanted advice, others just wanted to share their stories. I tried to be helpful, but I always told them the same thing. Get a good lawyer, document everything, and don't back down if you know you're in the right. One call was from a man in Tucson who was being charged by his HOA for tree removal on what he claimed was his private property. His situation was similar to mine, and I connected him with Felix, who was able to give him some guidance on how to fight it. Another call was from a woman in Scottsdale, whose HOA was trying to make her remove solar panels from her roof, claiming they violated the aesthetic guidelines. I told her about Arizona's solar rights laws, which generally prohibit HOAs from banning solar installations, and suggested she contact the Arizona Attorney General's office. These calls reminded me that my fight hadn't just been about me and my road. It was part of a larger pattern of HOAs overreaching and homeowners needing to assert their rights. I was glad that my case had become a precedent that could help others. As I entered my late 70s, I started having some health issues. Nothing catastrophic, just the usual wear and tear of an aging body that had spent decades doing physical labor. My knees ached in the morning, my back wasn't what it used to be, and I had to take medication for blood pressure and cholesterol. Felix started visiting more often, ostensibly just to check in but clearly to keep an eye on me. He never said it directly, but I knew he was worried about me living alone so far from town. During one visit, he brought up the road again. "Dad, I've been thinking. That road is going to need major resurfacing in the next few years. The asphalt is what, 30 years old now. It's held up remarkably well, but it won't last forever. Have you thought about what you're going to do when it needs to be replaced? I'll hire a paving company to do it. That's going to cost at least $20,000, probably more. Wouldn't it be easier to just let the HOA handle it?" I shook my head firmly. "We've been over this. That road is mine and it's staying mine. I didn't fight the HOA just to turn around and give them what they wanted." "I know, Dad, but you need to be practical. You're not getting any younger and maintaining a private road is a big responsibility." "Felix, I appreciate your concern, but I know what I'm doing. When the time comes to repave, I've got the money set aside to do it. I've been putting $500 a month into a separate account for the last 10 years specifically for road maintenance. I've got enough saved up to handle it." He looked surprised. "You've been saving that much, of course." I planned ahead. "That road is my responsibility, and I take that seriously. I'm not going to let it fall apart just because I'm getting old." Felix didn't bring it up again after that, but I could tell he's still worried. I understood his concern, but I also knew that giving up the road would feel like giving up a piece of myself. It was more than just asphalt and property rights. It was a tangible reminder of what I'd built in my life, the things I'd created through hard work and determination. When I turned 80, my family threw me a big birthday party at a restaurant in Sedona. Felix and his family came, of course, along with some of my old friends from my construction days and several neighbors from Copper Ridge Road. Marcus was there too, which I appreciated. He'd been a fair and reasonable HOA president, and we'd developed a mutual respect over the years. During the party, Felix stood up to give a toast. "I want to say a few words about my dad. He's been a lot of things in his life. A construction worker, a businessman, a husband, a father, a grandfather. But the thing that defines him most, I think, is his integrity. When he builds something, he builds it to last. When he makes a commitment, he keeps it. And when he believes something is right, he stands up for it no matter what. That road up to his house is more than just asphalt. It's a symbol of everything he's accomplished and everything he stands for. Dad, here's to you and to 80 more years of independence." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a lump in my throat. I wasn't usually an emotional person, but the recognition of what that road meant, not just to me but to my family and community, touched something deep inside. The road did eventually need major repairs, just as Felix had predicted. I was 82 when I finally accepted that the surface had deteriorated to the point where patching and sealing weren't enough anymore. I got quotes from 3 different paving companies, and they all came in around $25,000 for a complete resurface with new base work where needed. I hired a company out of Flagstaff that specialized in private roads and driveways. They did excellent work, completely removing the old asphalt down to the base layer, repairing the areas where settling had occurred, and laying down fresh asphalt in 2 layers for maximum durability. The project took a week, and I watched every day from my porch. The crew was professional and skilled, and seeing that road come back to pristine condition gave me tremendous satisfaction. This was the second time in my life I'd paved Copper Ridge Road, and while I wasn't doing the physical work anymore, it was still my project, My responsibility, my road. When the work was finished, the foreman came up to the porch to present me with the final invoice. "Mr. O'Brien, that's a nice piece of road. Should last you another 30 years easy, maybe longer if you keep up with maintenance." "That's the plan," I said, writing out a check. "I built this road the first time back in 1995. Wanted to make sure it was done right this time too." "You built it yourself, the whole thing?" "Every bit of it. Graded the roadbed, laid the base, paved it myself with help from a couple of guys I worked with." The foreman looked impressed. "That's pretty remarkable, sir. Not many people have the skills or the determination to do something like that. You should be proud." "I am," I said simply. "Thank you for the good work." After the paving was done, I invited Felix up to see the finished result. We drove slowly up Copper Ridge Road, admiring the smooth black surface. "It looks great, Dad, just like new." "Better than new. The company I hired does good work. This should outlast me by a long shot." "Speaking of which, have you thought about what you want to happen to the property when you're gone? Do you want me to keep it, or would you rather I sell it?" I'd been thinking about this question for years, but I'd never really settled on an answer. "I'd like you to keep it if you can. I know you've got your own life in Phoenix, and I don't expect you to move up here. But maybe you could use it as a vacation place, or rent it out to someone who'll take care of it. The important thing is that whoever ends up here understands the history. That road isn't just infrastructure. It's a piece of our family legacy." "I understand, Dad. I'll make sure it's taken care of." We sat on the porch that evening, drinking beer and watching the sunset just like we'd done many times over the years. The road stretched out before us, solid and permanent, a testament to work done right and principles worth fighting for. "You know what the best part of that whole HOA fight was?" I said after a while. "What's that?" "Winning, obviously, but also showing that individual people still matter. That you can stand up to institutions and bureaucracies and win if you're in the right and you don't give up. Too many people just accept whatever they're told because they think fighting back is too hard or too expensive. But sometimes you have to fight. Sometimes you have to say, no, this is mine and you can't have it. That's what freedom really means." Felix nodded thoughtfully. "You taught me that, Dad, and I've tried to teach it to my kids. That's a legacy that's even more valuable than the road." I spent my final years in that house I'd built, on that land I'd claimed, driving up and down the road I'd created. My health slowly declined, as it does for everyone, but I maintained my independence as long as I possibly could. Felix wanted me to move to an assisted living facility, but I refused. I'd lived my whole adult life on my own terms, and I intended to finish that way. When I finally did pass away at the age of 87, it was peacefully in my sleep in my own bed. Felix and his family handled all the arrangements, and the funeral was held in Sedona with a good turnout of friends, neighbors, and people from the community. Felix kept the house just as he'd promised, using it as a family retreat and eventually as a place to retire himself. And Copper Ridge Road remained exactly what it had always been. A private road, built by an independent man who believed in creating something solid and defending what was rightfully his. The story became part of local lore, told and retold as an example of one person's determination to protect their property rights against institutional overreach. Law students studied the case, HOA boards learned from the mistakes that had been made, and homeowners facing similar situations found inspiration in the outcome. But for me, it had never been about becoming famous or setting precedents. It had simply been about refusing to be pushed around, about maintaining ownership of something I'd built with my own hands, and about standing up for the principle that a man's property is his own until he explicitly chooses to transfer it to someone else. That road, Copper Ridge Road, stood as a monument to those principles long after I was gone. Every car that drove up it, every family that made the journey to their home, was traveling on a path created by honest work and defended by righteous determination. And in a world where individual rights often seem to be eroding in the face of regulations, fees, and institutional control, that road served as a reminder that sometimes, if you stand firm and fight smart, the individual can still win.